basically, you're not on the video. Your face is not on there, but everybody else is basically on there.
I know, it's okay.
Yes. And Alden, if you want to make a point that's on the video, then you'll have to like scoot up over there.
I'm good.
You see Patrick well, but
That's perfect. That's great. I'm very nice, Patrick. Well, I'm trying to position myself like Craig, so it should be good.
yeah.
How'd your basement turn out? Did you get it all taken care of?
It's we had to cut out like a foot of the wall and like a full section of the carpet. We had to rip out a whole bathroom, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, well, it wasn't. I mean, I don't know if anybody has anything feeling going with it. I'll say Liberty Mutual has always been very good to us. So I mean, like for the most part, really did. They came out with the estimates, and they just took the deductible out of what they thought, and it was still enough to cover. So it really,
Good for you.
yeah, we had to get a new roof so long ago because wind and hail damage pulled off part of the roof.
So what was it that was leaking?
That's really interesting. So we have an unfinished part of the basement, and the rest of the basement's finished. And in the unfinished part of the basement is where then there's a full bathroom, and where we notice the water is actually the closet. So there's this part of the basement, a bathroom, and then a closet. And then right outside the closet was where we noticed all this water, and it was the whole thing where the closet was all wet. But there's no water in and around the closet, and even on the bathroom. It's all on the other wall, on the opposite side from where the closet was, where all the water, sink and shower, and on the other
So you
side.
didn't see any water in the bathroom.
And you couldn't see any water in the bathroom. So the guy, I guess, when they came out, they were looking at we have no idea. We don't know where this water's coming from. And so they said my mother-in-law was actually there, and they had to go upstairs and turn on all the water, dishwasher, everything, just turn on everything. And the main drain out of the unfinished part of the basement was clogged, and was backed up, and it would come up the unfinished part of the basement, would flow underneath the water, underneath the wall in the bathroom. Actually, it was a little bit of a slope, so it would go underneath the wall in the bathroom, across the bathroom floor, and then underneath the other wall, and it was stopping in the carpet outside that closet. So, and because it was the main drain, they said it could be, there could be, it's not sewage, but it could be bacteria and stuff like that. And so anything that got wet with it, they had to cut out. So they had to cut out parts of the wall, and they got like a whole vanity, all the floor in the bathroom, and then like a foot of all the walls around the bathroom, and then a whole section.
So what was causing the backup?
They didn't know that, and that guy couldn't get, that guy didn't have the tools to go to actually, so then they had to call another company that come up, and they actually went up on the roof, did something from the roof, and put something all the way down through it, and unclogged it that way. No, they're good. So. It's always fun.
All right, so we all know our norms, so I think we're good. What we left off on last time was that our goal is to finish grade 5 in the geography strand and then to work backwards. And so we are ready to work backwards today. We have grade 5 done on all of them. On the A, we actually went all the way back. So A is done. B, we cut those out, part of them. And then C and D, we just have them actually, this one we went to. So a couple of them we started working backwards, and then we decided to finish grade 5 completely. G looks like it may be done, but we'll have to look at it just to make sure. So there's two ways we could do this. We could just take them and kick them out one at a time. Or we can divide the table in half, and you four could work on part of them, and the three of us could work on part of them. And then we could get back together and show what we've done and do it that way. I don't have a preference. Our goal, we said last time, was that we'd be done with geography today, so we'd be ready to start economics tomorrow. So we have a pleasure either way. If you think there's so few of us, if you think we can just kick them out together, we can do that. I know, whatever y'all want to do is good with me.
I'm leaning towards just kicking them out, just because
Yeah, I don't think
if you split up, you end up just doing it twice, right? You have to do it once with a
Right.
small group and then once again with a small group anyway.
Okay. Sounds good to me. Is that okay for you, Laura?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Patrick likes to speak for all. I think maybe we should look at what we've done with A, just so we don't duplicate it down below, because I think we found some duplicates last time. Is that big enough? You want me to make it bigger? Is that better? Okay. Anybody remember why we put the green up there? This one tells us what we need to do, but does anybody remember what that was?
When we were talking about a glossary, National Geographic has a great
good
glossary.
Yes, that's right.
What that one.
That's what that's about. I remember that. Thank you. So it's just for us to look at later when we're trying to finish. So then we left with the question that green is and solve problems. So we said ask and answer questions and solve problems we weren't sure about. Solve problems is in the 6th grade. So there was a question about whether to keep it or not.
In 6th grade, if they're acquiring, so they're gathering, and then they're processing, which leads them up to problem solving. If we're just acquiring in 5th, and then asking them to problem solve off what they've acquired, to me that seems like it could be the same thing.
So you're thinking it's not
Um,
the green, right?
Yeah, I can't, think so.
Does anybody else have a feeling one way or the other?
I could go either way. It doesn't make much difference. Like she said, it's already there. It's probably not needed.
I'm there, Kathy. What do you think about that? Because they're asking, so they're using textual evidence,
So if you're given a map, I don't even know what the grade would use. You're given a map and you have to find, you're given a map and then you're given questions out to the side. You have to use the map and find the evidence to answer the questions. So is that problem solving? Is problem solving, I don't know, I just think it sounds weird when it says
Well,
answer
what if
questions and problem solve.
If you have two maps, if you have a map about average rainfall, and you have a map about where people would settle,
Okay.
then you might problem solve about where people wouldn't want to be in this area with all the rainfall near this. So there may,
Or just the opposite. You
Right.
can look at somebody may be currently living there and now they're experiencing a drought where it is rainfall and you have to problem solve how you can use irrigation to get these people water. So you would have different sources and maps and different types of things. So even then you have to look at, you could have a topographic map and try to figure out, is the slope downhill? Is there an easier way to use some of those other things? And so what they're trying to get them to do is think through problems, but you would use maps and their geographic sources to start to kind of look at what are some of the real world problems people may be facing and trying to solve that.
So would they do that without and solve problems in there? Would that be done without that?
well, sure, they'll ask and answer questions.
I mean, to me, in some ways, if I were going to take one out, I would probably be more likely to take out the ask and answer questions. And the only reason why is, to me, solving problems sounds a little bit deeper. Ask and answer questions, to me, just it makes me think of multiple choice. Maybe that's just me, or probably, maybe nitpicking,
And maybe
but.
they ask and answer questions to go back.
Yeah, because we go from
Right.
construct,
Third
construct,
Right.
interpret.
Second, third grade maybe.
Interpreting.
And I think we,
I mean, I'm thinking you can go back to kindergarten, first grade and ask and answer questions about if you have a map in front of you, what does this grade?
I think where it gets harder, even as you is if you start to use multiple sources and putting things together, you have to and trying to figure out and putting the pieces, some of those other problem solving pieces together using some of the multiple sources, and that it would be the going deeper part with it that could be a little bit more difficult also.
if I remember right, the reason we talked about that was the fifth grade is, fourth and fifth is where the research component really kicks in. And the definition of research is asking and answering questions. And so that's why we talked about putting that in there. But should that be part of fourth grade? Because the ask and answer is not the teacher asking and the kids answering, but it's kids looking at the map and asking themselves questions without teacher prompt.
What would be the difference between interpreting and asking and answering questions on fourth grade?
Right, that's really what interpreting is.
Right, isn't it that?
Just as an aside, while you're thinking about that, to acquire information as textual evidence seems like an awfully awkward way to.
We just go from so simple to like,
Could you say use geographic research sources
To acquire information,
to solve
to
problems?
solve problems.
You could, I think.
you know how you hit on historical and current in third and fourth? It could be used geographical research sources, historical and current, to problem solve.
I think the reason we used textual evidence there was to give a sense that they would be looking
Citing
at
sources.
Right, they'd be citing sources and be trying to prove a point, or
From a map,
But
partially from a map. Yeah.
I just don't know that I've ever cited sources from a map before. I mean, I don't know how it you cite sources from a map?
Well,
Because
Like,
this
like
is,
just
a-
by
if
saying
you're
according
talking
to
about
this map.
Harriet Tubman, I could, say, what does this map tell me about, when people were moved, how people were moved, why they went a particular route instead of this particular route?
Right, and
So
I
in the
think it's
dead of
like
winter,
teaching.
when you know that this climate is gonna be horrific, why go this way? Well, because it was unsafe to go that way. So your chances of getting shot
So
were higher
as-
this way, so I'm choosing
As the
snow over
topical
getting.
map, as the topical graph, at the top, the graphical map shows,
Okay.
blah, 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 blah.
And to me, that's the same as interpreting what was in front of you.
And it could be, I'm not hearing anything on there.
One of the pre-meeting conversations we were having is trying to make this more teacher-friendly. And, the more direct language we could use, I think the better it would be for everyone, teachers, parents, administrators.
So, and what's the point, what we're looking to get at with this one is, if we're going thinking in terms of research and to go just a little deeper even than four, like when I think construct, okay, so they're building and then they're interpreting, I can see that interpreting is just answering specific questions about a map. Like you're trying to figure out what does this type of map say, what does that type of map say? And I still feel like this next one is where we're really trying to take some of those things. Now you've constructed, you've interpreted, and so you know the maps. Now let's put all this together to actually use it towards something. So that's what I like solving problems. I mean, I think if you can essentially say use these geographic sources, and I don't know how we want to put it, but just to kind of.
Or maybe we just say to inquire information to.
And maybe even, or even if it's rather than giving the definition of to conduct research and solve problems. So I mean, however we want to do it, so if they're conducting research, that may also if they're doing research projects, then they may have things like, are they going to cite sources? Are they going to do these different things when they do a research project? So
It says research there. Geographical research sources to.
Use geographic research sources. As a means together. It's just, I'm with you, I think it's too wordy. I think if a parent can't read it and get what it means, we're kind of defeating the purpose. So I don't know which words to take out and which to add, but I think something just needs to be tweaked a little bit.
what if we just stole the grade 6 language?
To me, that's much more simple. It says seventh they're reporting, sixth they're not.
I'm fine with grade 6 because that's really what we're saying. Right.
It's much easier to read.
That's kind of like what we're saying.
Yeah, and but if we scaffold it, then it's, like you said, 7 is reporting, 6 is answer
Answer
questions
questions.
and problems, and then 5 would just be answer questions.
Yeah, but that's
If we were gonna scaffold it.
Or process information.
right. But I think these were written.
And if we know the rest of the grade 6 curriculum, the other thing there is that we could be going from using American history in grade 5, for example, doing things around American history, or with grade 5, if that's where we still are, to grade 6, all of a sudden looking at the world. So they could be doing a similar thing, but now just doing it with different maps.
And the process standard for 6th grade is 3.2. So develop and apply strategies based on one's own experience in preventing or solving problems, and that's different than just 1.4 and 1.5. You're just using tools and resources to locate, select, and organize, comprehend, and evaluate written, visual, and oral presentations and works. So the standards stay the same. It would
Right. It would scaffold itself. Right. Does anyone have a problem with using grade 6 there? We're just pushing it over.
Not really.
So thumbs up. Okay. Good too. Bam, solve our own problem right there.
So are you riveted yet?
And how do you know why she needed a massage when she got home?
How many studies did you guys get from?
Okay, I think Anthony, that was your turn.
Say 3.
So not like this.
What do you got?
I'm gonna get a crooked leg.
We should do like a V.
This is like, is that okay? Like this.
Right.
I know.
No, that's good.
Okay.
We want to move all the tables?
You don't have to, but we're like this.
Don't play
I know,
it.
we're
We
just
can
gonna
just
angle
swing
it.
it, yeah.
We're making
Don't
you.
play
So
it.
that we make a bigger appearance.
Smart guy.
Are you gonna move too?
I'll get that over, yeah.
This, end up with a mess.
Say that.
I wasn't sitting right.
I'm staying close enough where I can read. You know, I've got eye problems here.
I might have an extra class.
You get in this way?
Victor,
Alright.
Awesome.
Okay.
That's good enough for me.
Yeah, it's kind of stuffy in here.
Man, it's awful. So I left the need to add something about variety of purposes in K4. I think you've got, Kathy, I think that was a point you made based on what you were seeing.
But didn't we, when we added historical and current, doesn't that kind of steer it towards a variety of purposes?
So we nix it?
I think
Is everybody okay with using that comment? All right. So can we say A is done?
and so it also has that construct maps part, right?
Yes, at the bottom, yes.
And this might be a silly question, but the two rows between the A and the A continued, can that just all not be combined into like, will they not combine that all into one thing?
Yes, it could be.
Because I think to me, that's one of the big setbacks of the format and how this looks right now. Like, I don't see a purpose for those rows.
No.
Well,
And I think teachers look at it and it's like discombobulated.
so here would be the difference between this one and this one. 1.10 talks about multiple contexts. So
Right.
you're this, you're that, so you're looking at things in multiple contexts. Where when they wrote whatever was up here originally was just in the 1.4 and using tools.
Yeah.
So 1.4 and 5 was about using tools, and then they said, well, you want to do this in multiple contexts.
But we could just put them all together. 1.4,
really, you could
1.5,
add
and
1.10 up because the classroom, the school community, and the zoo and the grocery store
Are on multiple contexts. And the way we've changed it, it would work.
Uh-huh.
And you don't have to do that now, I was just thinking before
Right.
we like publish something final.
No, I
I
agree.
think that should be looked at.
So we're thinking combine these.
We can do that probably on
Put
one.
the note.
It's gonna make it much.
C-O-N.
There
More
were several that
reader-friendly.
we did that a lot.
Okay, understanding location, make the concept of predictions and solve problems. Okay, so you see we have here possible thoughts that we wrote last time.
Because we were, if we change where history goes, you would want to change that.
Right. Right.
So, in the 5th grade column, we want to specify that it has something to do with the nation nationally.
I think we went broad to give however people fit that in. Was the reason we wrote it so
Because it's
broad.
elsewhere.
Right, they'll match that with whatever we're doing in history, they'll match it with the other pieces.
Of course, it does specify in B there that would change what it does say the United States. Features of the United States. See that section below it?
We read those out. So we want to add those above them?
No, I just.
Yeah, why did you read those out?
Well, we were here, maybe in the afternoon after you left.
Yeah, I was wondering the rationale for going in.
Well, we didn't really let it out, we just kind of
Just
combined
pushed it above.
Yeah.
See what's only went from there to.
Right.
Just
We just pushed them up.
I would think you would really want nation if you're studying it, if you're studying the relationships between. I don't know that in looking at interactions in the United States history, I would think it would be both things.
It just goes from Missouri to nothing in bed, and then we're going to major cities and nations of the world. And
Yeah, there's
the
no
process
So, yeah,
on-
maybe you should.
Right.
There's
Just
no
for that
match.
name.
I'm just saying the way we set it up from the beginning, and then kind of void there.
Right.
And it could be something as simple as adding one on a national level, or that's fine too.
I think it should be both. I mean, why would you go from worlds, 7 continents, and oceans to
Yeah, that,
nothing?
Right.
Nothing for 2 years on a.
Yeah.
Right, no, you're exactly right.
Globally. And
Right.
then,
yep, I know it's.
and then in 7th grade, well, hello, there is a world out there still.
Well, if historically you're talking about coming to America, then there's some world pieces that you fit in with what you're doing. And you can start talking about triangle trade and some of that kind of stuff.
Depending on where you even do it, you start getting into explorers.
Right.
You're getting into a lot of those things too. That depends on, depends on when we still decide whether those types of things are gonna be 4th, 5th grade, but
Since it is kind of specific. I mean, as a teacher, I would want those things to align a little bit with my other study focuses.
Right.
Because if 4th grade ends up being U.S. history too, if we divide that, we would probably want that to be major cities or capitals, and then, I don't know. No,
No,
What
I'm
do you
trying to
need
figure
for-
out, is 4th grade nation or 4th grade American history?
what did we, I don't think we decided.
Okay, then
You
that's
really
maybe
didn't
where,
decide.
That would be the dilemma.
okay, because it's got regions on 2nd, and then we were doing regions in 3rd. And then you jump to 4th, and you got cities of, and I know when I taught, when 3rd grade was Missouri history, no, 4th grade was Missouri history, you cover the regions, the cities, the borders, and the rivers. And it's like we just took that and spread it between 3 different grade levels. So if they're learning Missouri in second grade, and they do like the soft play maps and all that jazz, they're gonna know the major cities of Missouri and the rivers.
Right.
And the bordering states. I mean, you have to, they had was it last year, second grade or third grade? And they had a test on that, you have to know them, so. I don't know. It seems like we go from state to nations of the world.
Okay, let's start here. Does a kindergarten student need to know anything about this concept of understanding location to predict or solve problems?
I think we want to solidify that concrete, tangible thing. You know, I think the one above it, you know, in strand A, it's not that we're doing nothing,
Right.
you know, in kindergarten. But I think if in terms of this being an assessment document, I don't.
If kids can do, remember this, if kindergarten kids can do this, do they need to be assessed if they can do B?
I don't think so.
I don't
In
think
saying
so either.
that, as a teacher and parent, it's not that we don't do those things.
Right.
But it's just that in terms of.
If I'm
an
trying to
imprint,
mark, can a kid
measurable,
master these in a
Yes.
measurable way? Do I really?
I'm not sure how you would do that developmentally in a fair way. How's that?
Mhm.
Basically, what, as we look at all these, is really being able to read a map and locate places.
Mhm.
Right? And what we're saying is a 5-year-old. I think of the geography literature are expected to have real difficulty in
understanding this illustration as representing a real place. They can if it's really connected to their personal experience, but as soon as you get, right.
Which is right.
But when you get beyond that, having that more conceptual ability becomes a challenge.
And we put down there, C and B continued, the second B continued, see the notes we need to add above, below.
Right.
Those were things that I think we were talking about.
Yes.
Where does that go? And some of that I think does go in kindergarten. And so when you're talking about relative location, that's vocabulary that you need to build early.
Yes. So with this, describe a location using, and then list some of these types of, to me, that would be appropriate. And we do that already.
Directional term,
We
yeah.
do that already.
Beside, next to.
Right. That's something that we teach. We just don't have it listed. Okay, so relative, absolute.
Maybe it's describe the location of a place using directional terms or whatever, you know, and then maybe parentheses above, below, next to.
Uh-huh. say that one more time so we can.
Description of location, explaining where the place is in relationship to one or more other places. See, I still think it's.
Are you talking about using this for kindergarten?
I'm not sure that what that says is any different than what first grade says, though. Locate a place by pointing it out on a map and by describing its relative location.
Well, it is different.
But to me, the part that's different is what you're doing it with.
Right, you're talking about a map. Here, you're just talking about, you're describing a place.
I may be talking about an object or a person
Right.
or,
Right,
you know, I think of a dial, 3-year dial or whatever. You have the blocks, can you put this block above the other
Right.
block next to
right.
that kindergarten screening test?
Yeah,
like
that's, you know, some the up and down. Front and back.
Which is a part of understanding location.
I propose that nothing goes there, so that's
Okay.
my vote. Because that's just me, that's my thinking.
I'm gonna go back to saying, what is that we actually want the kids to do at the end of 5th grade? Or whatever, I mean, the whole point of this is to do what? The point of this section is for them to be able to do what? Know where some of these things are, maybe be able to identify them, like, when they come out, what exactly is it that we actually want them to have, like, what's the knowledge that we're hoping to carry forth until their high schools?
Relative and absolute location. And to understand that in the concept of.
So, I mean, do we think we've got that? And so, yeah, and are we, does that mean we want to be more specific, less specific? Because at least in that first line, it's very specific to
What we're
Missouri.
studying. Well, we've got continents.
The continents, but what I'm not sure, it does say continents, but I guess even as I'm looking at it, we've gone from continents in 2nd grade to, that's it, it goes from continents straight to Missouri.
That's where,
Yeah, that's the problem.
I'm fine with kindergarten as it is, I'm even fine with first. I'm looking at the second, third, fourth, fifth,
Yeah.
and how it transitions together, and it's just too choppy for me. And so if we wanna start at fifth and work back, that's fine. But, again, you're identifying continents, oceans, regions of Missouri, historical and current figures. There's like a huge chunk of social studies we've looked at.
So, look at, here's what we moved. This was over at 5th. Major topographic features of the United States.
I would leave that at first.
Do what?
I would put that in this.
That was already in 5th. The question we had was, should it move to 4th if we're looking at the national stuff in 4th?
Okay, we're dead set on the state being in second, correct? Have we agreed on that? No,
I think
yes.
so.
I don't think we ever have the state at second.
Okay, so it's a third?
And regions, stuff is,
No, we had the state at
Oh,
second.
I may have taken them up wrong.
No.
No, we never.
That's what I'm saying.
We
I don't
never
think
had
it's
the state at
second.
second.
State should
I think
be.
it's third.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I
then-
hadn't even looked at the
See,
bottom.
I didn't even-
What?
Thank you.
What?
I just, when they came to me, I stuck them up there.
No, that's okay.
No, that's
One
good,
region.
good. Region,
Yeah.
state,
Well,
got it.
there's 2 regions, so it wasn't, at one point we
Right.
discussed having a region
Regions
of the
country,
country and a region
Right,
of
that's
the state.
Thank you.
Okay, now that makes a little more
There's
sense.
tape right there. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's no
That's my
big deal, I
fault.
just couldn't put it all together that way.
It was stuck to that one, and so I just put it up there. If you want this done correctly, you need to come early. Do it yourself.
Thank you, I thought
Yep, very good. You're exactly right. I know it when I see it now.
Assistant superintendent. goes to our school district, says, if you want things done correctly, do them yourself.
Do it yourself.
Or they will be.
So what was the rationale of the cities of Missouri being in fourth grade?
I think we just hadn't been changed yet.
They were already
Start.
there. They were already
See
there.
how it says possible name and locate major
Yeah, it
cities
seems
in
like
one
that
before?
seems like that should just be over there in third grade.
Yeah, so then I'd rather do something more geared toward nation and fourth.
So,
I don't even think you need to list the cities, we all know, I mean, as
Yeah.
long as you have major cities, I just delete that whole box. Figure out something else to put
Just
there.
assume that third grade's complete. I think,
I'm just recalling
I
that
agree.
conversation
Which conversation?
that we had about that, why
Oh.
those were added.
Possible name and locate, where you
No, it
put
was
possible,
funny.
that's.
Oh.
what do we, because it is listed also under possible with third grade. So
Right.
would those, would we just consider those major cities?
Right.
Because essentially it says possible, doesn't that kind of include all the stuff above it also?
I think that's
Yeah.
what we discussed before.
Yeah, that's what we could
That's
argue.
why you wrote possible,
right,
because we were gonna move that.
Right.
And of course, where I live, the Merrimack River is actually a major river. No, we didn't argue that, no.
That was a conversation.
Yeah, this was the conversation. Lori, you missed that part.
I tried to listen, I just couldn't.
Yes.
find it.
Yes, you missed that
If
conversation.
anybody attached to
So-
someone else.
so
That's why we decided, let's finish fifth grade and we'll come back to this.
I will second what Laura said, and I just eliminate everything that's in the fourth box there, that you've got highlighted right now, because assuming that it will be covered under the third grade.
The rest read that.
I can't. How would you put that?
Now, here's what I really could see if you do it this way. Is some sort of a geographic unit about the United States before you even started talking about explorers and settlers, and you start, because as you start to look at things like, and you could start to even see some sort of a unit in a fifth grade textbook where they talk about the fact, settling what are the rivers, and then as you didn't think consistently coming back to that, because you need to know like Rocky
Right.
Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains, and you got to know the continental divides and all those things as to how things flow and why rivers are where they are and why people settled. But I could even see them starting to do just the geography lesson even before some of that. So I do think before we fill in fourth grade, we do kind of need to figure out what we are doing with fourth grade. So I'm not sure we've been 100% short on that just yet, whether or not we're breaking fourth and fifth grade up or whether we're not. Or maybe, I'm sorry, breaking fifth grade up or whether we're not.
So something that would be interesting to me in fourth grade is, so we focused on the state in third grade. In fourth grade, kind of breaking up the geography of where does our state fit within the geography of regions of the United States. So, you have the southeast and northeast, which would lend itself to also talking about the exploration of how different parts were settled first. Those sorts of things. So I would be interested in seeing students get an understanding that there are different regions within our whole country.
You could frame it around fourth grade as the United States in the present, and fifth grade the United States in the past.
So I was just kind of thinking the same thing. Could you do here's where we are now?
Sorry, I was looking at
Thank you for that
different.
expression.
I was looking at different how that jives with further on down the concepts of
Change some of
place.
it.
No, it actually fits really well.
But the idea of here's where we are kind of now. Here, and you could do even geography. Here's what the country still continues to look at. Here's these regions. Here's kind of where there's and it's going to fit with say culture and some. So who are we now as a people? And then it's okay. So now how? And then you go back to how did we actually get here? So here's where we kind of are now. Let's look at some of those things. So how did this all kind of start?
So you're making it relative to them first, and then, okay, from here.
So if you do that, what does that do with I see how the economic strand would fit into that, and geography and inquiry. what would that do with the history strand?
Well, it's already in here, guys. If we go down to F in geography, it's identify different kinds of regions in the United States and analyze how their characteristics affect humans, history, economy, governance, society, and today's culture.
But if we think it fits better,
So it's, I think it's actually already in here. Grade 4. It's F.
F, E, F, okay.
There it is. Different regions in the United States.
I don't know, F is understanding relationships between regions. B is understanding location to make predictions of problem solving.
Right.
They're
So,
awfully similar.
so if you use, so we might, maybe we can get rid of a strand.
That's
But
what
if
I'm
we
saying.
can't, and it becomes location specific, then what F is telling me is that we're looking at identifying locations of regions within the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a difference.
Yeah. Because the one is location,
Right.
and this is relationships. And so what's in relationships is we're looking at regions in the United States. If we want to be consistent, then in location, locations in the in regions of the United States.
Let's do that.
But if we want to be consistent with this.
So,
And then this one, I think speaks to what Patrick was talking about, which is then, that helps us understand relationships within those regions, among those regions, which is what this strand is.
I mean, I think, and I'm just kind of looking at the big, but, because even, and Craig mentioned, what would that do to 3? Like in grade 4, for example, would we, if we go to more current looking at now,
And that's in here. It says in today's culture.
but that would get, like, when we look at just larger pieces, we can still look at the principles of republic. You can still look at a lot of those things in 4th grade. You can still see how those things would play out. If you're talking about things currently, the one that might be more difficult would be the U.S. world history. But I think, as you look, like in grade 1, 2, and 3 right now, currently in kindergarten 1, 2, and 3, there's very little bits of history already, and we're going to be beefing some of those up by moving state. So I don't know even if we. But I think it's important to frame. So I do think sometimes one of the things we miss, and I know we've kind of talked about this with history, is that we miss the relevance of it with how it relates to what's going on now. Like I will say, for example, and you have elections, I feel like there's even times, or I remember after like a presidential election, discussing with our 5th grade team, my 5th grade team I was teaching, the fact that we have to teach checks and balances and all these things, and right now the Senate is confirming all these people. There's actual evidence of how the Constitution is currently playing out by having the Senate hearings on confirming the people that the president wants, but because it doesn't fit in when we normally want to talk about this, we're just not going to do it. It doesn't make sense. Like here it is right now playing out for the kids how well we're talking about this is relevant. But because this isn't the unit that we normally teach the Constitution in, we're not going to show it to them. That's fine. So I think at times that we can find ways to start with the relevance for kids of saying, look, here's where we are. Here's some examples of how you see how these principles play out. Here's where you see this document actually taking effect right now. And then say, okay, but now let's go back and look at where that actually came from to me, and then you can constantly tie it back to where they are now, and it adds that relevance piece to it. So I think if we end up, on Craig, to your point, even if we end up looking like we have fewer sticky note, or fewer things in number 3, I think if we can make it more, maybe go deeper and not as much, it might even be more beneficial to find that. And I really like, at least I personally, I'm not speak for everybody, but I really like the idea of making this more where we are now, and then starting that history piece after that. And I don't know what we consider now. So maybe I can also say.
I guess my argument against that is I think that's something you do all the time, every grade, is that you connect it to lived life experience right now, teachable moments at this time.
You should be, yes. I
So,
don't disagree with that.
to say we're gonna do that in 4th grade or 5th grade only, or that's gonna be the focus, I think that's just good teaching. That's what you do all the time, is use these teachable moments, regardless of the content that you're on.
I think that's why we added and current at the top and the
It
languages.
is, that's why we added it.
But if we're not purposeful in actually teaching what goes on right now, then we're expecting people to be able to even make those connections or see it or even be able to teach it explicitly. At the times you can make loose connections, but a teacher's going to have a different level of background knowledge when they're making those connections than will a student. And if we're not even giving some of those background knowledge explicitly and purposely teaching it, then I think there could still be pieces that they miss.
So maybe it's adding a strand of history across all grade levels that's current events shaping our national history. You know, what is it that's happening right now that's shaping our history? So that it becomes a. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious who's going to build those lessons. Each year that's different.
But it would be based on.
Well, I think that'd be great. I can see that being a lot of fun.
More like a civics class. Civics straight.
But right now, we're looking at B, understanding location. And we have 4th grade open. We have 3rd grade full, and everyone seems to be happy with 3rd grade, right? 4th grade's open. Down below in 4th grade is talking about regions of the United States. And it seems to me to make is most consistent to look at location in regions of the United States.
So here's a question. And you tell me no, I'm just gonna throw this out there. Do we want to answer the question? We have an hour to lunch, 50 minutes to lunch. Do we want to try to answer the question on, knowing that when we add our 4 people who are gone, it could change. Do we want to answer the question on how we divide 4th and 5th grade? But I think that really is a sticking point on how
Will
we
be
look
messed
at
up
it.
in
Right,
a lot of places.
right. So shouldn't we just answer that question on what we want? Because it comes back to the 3rd strand.
I'm just happy to know state's not the second.
Hey,
Okay,
pretty
now.
good there. All right,
That's great.
happens.
I was like, oh my gosh, what happened?
I missed one meeting.
Leave you alone.
I missed half of the day.
I missed half a day. Things are.
Like, I followed along and none of that happened on here.
So you
Yes,
wanna do that?
I think we definitely should.
I think so.
And
So you wanna do a round thing where we all tell what we think and then go from there? That seemed to be effective.
We
when we
definitely
first
could,
met.
yes, we definitely could do it that way. I don't know that I want to go first though.
oh, I can.
Okay.
Sure. I'm gonna go back to Kathy's idea, which the more and more I think about it, even just sitting here, I really like. I know my good friend Alden may not agree with me,
I think we're on different sides on this one.
but all the way through, I think you can explicitly teach each of those trainings, because I do think while we hope this happens, this is not something that we do currently a lot. And it actually came up in one of our last sessions when we were discussing the fact that, I don't know how it even came up, but like we don't talk about World War II at all until students are in 8th grade. We don't talk about, a lot of these things are not explicitly taught. So when we talk about principles of the Republic and we talk about, I'm just going through it, I just think relationships, we start looking at how do, what do the regions look like now. I think we can teach some of these things through different things. We can talk about now and upcoming, like what is the relationships and cultures, the tools of social science inquiry. We can start to look at some of the more current ones and kind of what do we have now. So what is, I know we could talk about those things, but I just think there's a strong piece that we could explicitly teach a lot of the things that we hit on, and looking at it from a perspective of what does this kind of look like right now, and being explicit about it instead of loose connections that are done kind of throughout. Because I will say, I'm still just going to say, I think that is a piece that gets dropped a lot, and we hope it happens, but it's, it may happen here or there, but it's not explicitly connected, and which has also been at times my worry with the expanding horizons, is that we see it from the outside and as adults, but kids, after they go through 6 years, they don't see it. So they'll never actually see the full connection. So if we don't stop and explicitly explain all the connections that we just made at some point in time to where they are currently, that even though from the outside we see it from a mile high, they'll never quite actually get it all if we don't tie it together.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Uh-huh.
One of the issues about grade 5 is we try to do 400 years of history in one grade level. If we go the route you're thinking, possibly, how are we solving our issue with 400 years of history?
Could you do both? Could you write explicitly in the curriculum that you want this to be about, we want to address the United States now. We want kids to have a basic foundational understanding of geography in the United States right now, of government in the United States right now, of all of those things. But then also do kind of put a chunk of history in there, maybe from early world exploration up to they will have had through their Missouri study probably some good background in westward expansion, I would think. It's hard to talk about Missouri's history and without relationship to there. So if you did that state piece as both current Missouri and Missouri's past, and then you did the current nation and then the nation's past, you could do it that way. You could just not do all of it. Because right now, 5th grade goes from early world explorations to Civil War reconstruction. That's a lot.
The only other thing I can think of is that it depends on our focus. Do we get so caught up in focusing on that they're memorizing or learning each thing so specific over that 400 period of time, or is the focus of we're going back through this with the understanding of how we got to where we are? And I know that's supposed to be with history, but I think a lot of times we end up, that's not what the test says. Those aren't what the assessment pieces look like. The assessment piece is going to say, what was this specific thing? And a lot of that may be how we're building that. But is there even a way just to kind of focus through this as we're doing it to say the entire focus of this, like why are we talking about these pieces? It's the understanding that people had to get here in some way, shape, or form. So that's why we're talking about land bridge, or that's why we're talking about these pieces. That's why we're talking about the Constitution, because it's still affecting us today. That's why we're talking about all these different things, and it should be, but I think sometimes we still miss those. But so I think it's some of it helps us just kind of remember. I feel like we do kind of make a shift towards history at some point in time here, and I don't think we've ever explained why we sometimes end up looking at social studies through the concept of history. And it does sound like that's still maybe where the secondary folks are coming. So I think if we even do that in 4th grade, and we start world history, it still is tying back to where we're doing this. Now, hopefully somewhere the kids are still understanding that, but I do think at least for the next few, 7th grade is geography, and 8th grade is U.S. history. I mean, they're looking at 5th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, and probably even some in 7th grade a little bit, depending on what they do. That's taught through the lens of history. And if we haven't explained that history should be setting us up for this piece, or seeing how it's relevant to us now, I'm afraid that still gets missed, and that's why we have kids who think social studies is boring. That's why history is not as important. That's why these pieces aren't there, because they don't ever quite still feel how it actually impacts me right now.
Can I just ask?
Yes.
So what is your suggestion?
My suggestion is we make fourth grade.
Let's narrow this down.
My suggestion was Kathy started out, which is what would be that week, which was more of Kathy's projection of what is, more current, the current picture of the United States. I don't know what the actual language would be, but my biggest hang up is actually the word now, because I'm not sure we can ever quite talk about now. We're going to have to define what we mean. Even with current, we'd have to look at what we mean by current.
How about contemporary?
Yeah, I mean, but whatever the word is, we have to figure out what that time period actually means, because it is hard to talk about now. Because there's even, and I'm also just kind of thinking aloud and spitballing this, but there's even a part that says now and kind of upcoming, like I keep on cultures and the fact that we're looking at by 2050, we're going to be at 50% of the people in the country will be what we consider now to be minorities. But that's right now with our kindergartners, when they're 40 years old, the world that they're in won't look much like the country that we're even in. So how are kids learning about different cultures, and what does that mean for our country? What are some of these things that are going to change us in terms of that number 6? So just pieces like that, so I can see some of here now and maybe the foreseeable future as a way to kind of set up the history.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, I think. I don't see that as, like I said earlier, I think that's something that's part of teaching in general, and maybe because of that it should be part of the, if you feel like it's not happening enough in classrooms, that teachers aren't drawing connections to the content of a lesson plan and what's happening in the real world, so to speak, contemporary, then that probably should, in my thinking, actually falls under the tools of inquiry, or something that's more of a covering principle than it does for all teaching. So whether I'm teaching about geography, or whether I'm teaching about history, or whether I'm teaching about economics, I should be making connections to what's in the lived experience of the child in a way that makes sense to them. So I don't see how that helps in terms, of taking, and I'm not, maybe part of it is because I'm not even sure what that looks like in terms of a curriculum, in terms of saying, okay, 4th grade, we're going to teach what's happening now. But we're not going to do that in 3rd grade, or we're not going to do that in 2nd grade, or 1st grade. So I don't understand exactly, I guess, what you're proposing, of what it would look like.
Okay. So what are you proposing?
Basically, that most of what would happen in 4th grade would be building towards a broader understanding of things that happen regionally within the United States. And so if we're talking about history, we're talking about the movement of people to different regions, when did it happen, or events that happened in different regions at the same time. Something that we don't do right now, because we tend to think about history as chronological, moving across the great westward expansion. Well, actually, believe it or not, there were people in California long before we did the Oregon Trail. And we don't teach that right now, because we pretend that region of the country didn't exist, because we use this chronological form of teaching history of the spread of the United States. But we know that 3/4 of the United States was actually occupied by the Spaniards, under the control of the Spaniards, long before the English got there. So I guess what my inclination is still to build from the state to understanding regions of the United States, which allows us to explore all the concepts, whether it's historical or economic or whatever, and then build towards 5th grade being the nation, because 6th grade is the world.
Okay.
I was just thinking about what he just said about nation and then talking about Spaniards in California. Would that be nation or would that be North America? I mean, that's not really the United States. It wasn't the United States
Right.
until later on in history.
Right.
So I don't know how, I guess that jives. I mean, yes, it should be, I don't disagree that it should be taught, but I don't know that it would fall under nation because the nation was just,
No, I was saying
The
it'd be
13
part of
colonies.
regions of what's now the United
Yeah.
States, basically. Whereas in the past, it's been taught with fifth grade, you would teach like Spanish, these areas were Spanish areas, these areas were French areas. And a lot of times you discuss how some of those areas, you may discuss how those areas became a part of the country, whether it was through French and Indian War, whether it's through some other measure, whether it's buying the Louisiana Purchase, you know, how those places, that's how they end up being covered. A lot of times you would, I mean, I'm just teaching those maps where these areas are Spanish, these areas are the English colonies, these areas are French, you know, up until, so that's where a lot of it was in fifth grade.
Yeah, so if we were looking at history, fifth grade, you know, it is so broad, and some of this, if we adopted a new approach, could be moved to early grades. You know, the viability and diversity of Native American cultures before Europeans came, if we had an earlier section that was an earlier grade, say fourth grade, that we were looking at regions of the country, that allows us to look at the viability and diversity of Native Americans across what's now the United States. Outlined this kind of another history one that outlined the discovery, exploration, early settlement of America. Again, we could address that at an earlier phase. And give it a fuller treatment than what I think typically happens there is the New England colonies.
Okay, Aaron, tell us what you're thinking. How's it fit?
I haven't really made a determination one way or the other. I can kind of see both ways, and I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say.
Okay, you're a pass for now. We will come back to you.
Oh, that's okay.
Laura's a pass for now. Kathy?
I think that, you know, like, if we were to move, if we were to make fourth grade focus just on current, the problem that it would cause is the problem that exists right now, that fifth grade has too much
That's
US
right.
history. But I do think, I think that what Alden is talking about in terms of current study is an ideal, not the reality that I ever see. That it's talked about in terms of today.
Agreed.
You know,
I agree.
And
so
that's
I feel like it needs to be, you know, articulated.
I think that's a lack of analytical thinking across every content area. Just teachers are so busy with, I just need to mark these boxes off, that we don't connect the past with the present. And we don't even look across, sometimes we don't even look across how a kid's doing in a semester. We just aren't analytical. We're so busy, we don't take the time to look how pieces fit. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
Go ahead, Kat.
so I do, I do think that United States history needs to be divided up the way fifth grade is right now. And know we've had a lot of discussions about not letting history be the guiding force.
Yeah, I almost just
At
said
the-
it again.
At the same time, I feel like I feel like part of where that tendency comes from is that people interactions are the guiding force. You know, that's what all of us connect to most, are the people interactions that happen in a place, or that happen with the economy, or that happen with the geography. And so I think that tendency to go towards history is because it's about people, you know. And as a teacher,
And it's concrete about me.
yes.
I can say I've done these things.
And so when I go to look for resources as a teacher to teach something, it's easier to search for things in terms of concrete people and happenings instead of concepts. You know? And so to me, there's a reality there that exists that I don't want to overlook, because teachers and kids wrestle with it every day. I think teachers will naturally gravitate towards history as the framework, because it involves people and it involves things that they can connect together easily. And so I do think we need to get that in place. What are we going to do to frame, you know, I think it will help frame other things. But I do think we need to split U.S. history up between over grade levels versus just 1 year. I do think it's too much. In our district, we've moved the entire grade level curriculum. We still address all the expectations, but we've already divided them. And 5th grade only has the Civil War for a year. So. Now, that being said, it is very difficult to find resources at a 5th grade reading level that are consistent. Not that we should build a curriculum around what's available, but I think when we get frustrated with teachers for not teaching things, the reason that they don't teach things often is because they don't know what to use. And part of that is a resource issue, and part of it is the cycle that we have in our country of not teaching social studies, and so people lack the basic foundational content knowledge to teach it all. So it's a two-part thing.
Thank you. Tom, what's your thinking?
Well, my first thought is, I would thoroughly disagree with anybody, even Alden, when they say to not let history be our guiding force. If we don't let history guide us, we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes.
Actually, we're in agreement on that.
Did you not disagree? Did you say you think we shouldn't? So, I
think history is incredibly important. I think it's probably in teaching we put too much emphasis on it, because what it tends to do is make us look backwards and not deal with what's in front of us.
Great,
So
but
we
if we
spend
don't look
huge
backwards,
amounts of time teaching about what happened in the past and very little bit of time talking about what's happening today.
well, and I would say that the reason that's the very reason why we should spend way more time on the past, because it would give us an understanding of why we are dealing with the things we are today. Because humans are humans. History repeats itself, but we don't have to repeat the mistakes of history if we understand it. So for me, the focus should primarily be on history. It's hard for me to look at the compartmentalizing of cells, school, regions. I don't think compartmentally, so that's very difficult for me to. All I know is I've gone through the document all the way through the 8th grade, and I've taken away the standards, I've taken away all the concepts, I've just literally typed out for each grade level what this document says that teachers are to teach, and I'm appalled by it, honestly. I find it dismal. So for me it's hard for me to even work from this because I don't like what it says in the first place. I think in many ways in some ways it's way too broad, in other ways it's way too pinpointed, focused, and it focuses on things that I just think, what the heck? I mean, why are we putting so much emphasis on this when this is a tiny little piece of the puzzle? We've got all these other big pieces over here that we're just going ding, 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 and we're just barely scratching the surface of, but we're pinpointing to such minute detail certain aspects that, I mean, if we're trying to educate kids to be better for themselves first, meaning we're not just giving them information to know, we're actually trying to, better the individual, that individual will better society. But if we're not teaching them, if we're not educating them to learn, to really have an understanding of the world and where we came from, we're going to continue down the same road we're on. So it's hard. I don't have an answer for that because I don't think that way. So it's just really tough for me on the compartmentalizing thing. And going off of this is very difficult for me as well. Because I kept trying to read and study and try to really see what is it that we're trying to teach kids in Missouri. So I finally just went through and took all the bells and whistles out and just literally typed out what every grade level has. And I can tell you, because I have kids, my oldest is an 8th grader, the dismal education that they're getting in what we call social studies is dismal. It is just what it is. So there's my 2 cents. It's not helpful to what we were talking about, but I think history has to be like the guiding point of everything we're doing in this. Because if it isn't, every mistake of history will continue to repeat. And we're seeing that today, how we can go back into history and see the very things that we're doing today are things that were done before. I mean, human nature is human nature.
And it could be argued, because of human nature, we're going to repeat them anyway.
But you don't have to repeat the mistakes if you learn from them.
Right, but hopefully we are learning from them. Right, I agree, yeah. Okay. Any question or comment before we move on? All right, so I think we're doing the same thing at 5th grade that we are at 8th grade. It's so broad historically that we skim over everything and we don't teach anything with good depth. So my thinking, part of U.S. history comes in the state when we're talking about westward expansion, and when we're talking about so who was in Missouri before Europeans were. So I think that's pieces of history or historical concepts. In the state, you're also looking at when we get to principles of, and we're looking at some of the state documents and things like that. So that comes with history as well. I think if we look at grade 4 as a regional approach to the United States, I can see how we would combine regions with the early exploration. And I don't know, in my head there's not a magic cutoff. Is it at the age of Jefferson? Is it around 1800? I don't know where that piece fits, but I definitely think we have to front load some of that. And can we get through, with a regional look at the United States, can we get through Thomas Jefferson? Can we get through 1800? That was a great big election. That was pretty important to the United States. And then do we hit then in 5th grade, Jefferson through, however far we can go. I mean, we're still pedaling pretty fast to get through. I just think it's so much to ask. And I think we are making an error by never looking at recent history, which the kids are ancient as well. But we never teach recent history because we work our way up to Civil War in 5th grade and we work our way up to Civil War in 8th grade. Well, we've never looked at recent history. So I think we have to figure out how to push it down. I don't know where the magic cutoff is, but I think a regional look at grade 4, a region of the nation and the founding of the nation would be a place to start, is just my opinion. Because we have to somehow subdivide that. Or, as Tanya points out, we never teach any depth, we just teach this surface level understanding of everything. It is elementary. You hope they get more sort of deeper as you go into high school. You hope there is a deeper approach to some of those concepts. But we don't even touch them now, so I think we have to do a better job. So I'm thinking regional with history combined. So we skipped multiple people. Aaron?
I'm with you. I'm kind of seeing both sides. That's, like I said, I'm just on the fence. Where do you stop history? I really liked what he was saying about going over recent history so they kind of have an idea of, okay, how this relates to me, and then, but then again, you really need to lead into the explorers first so they can understand that, but how do you combine both of them? I'm not seeing it. It just mind-boggling to me. I mean, I think we should have history, maybe, like you said, maybe look at the last 100 years. Call that recent history. Maybe it doesn't look like anything we've talked about. Maybe we're doing nation. Maybe we look at the last 100 years, but we have to talk about explorers too, so they have some kind of concepts to build up to the next year. I don't know, maybe we're looking at both ends of it. I don't know how that would look, or it may be a mess.
I just think some areas we're in the geography standard and all we're doing is talking about history.
That's
Well,
what I was just gonna
but
say.
I think-
You just might as well go to the history stream.
I think we,
Yeah, but I think it's
I
remember
think
what
we have
we
to,
look for.
I think that
Oh, I'm
determines what
sure.
we do with geography.
I'm sure, that's why I'm kind of sitting here thinking, everything you're talking about is with the strand that we're not on.
Right, but
And I know we want your, I
if we
know,
don't determine that, how do we know what we're doing with geography?
you don't.
To make sense of writing curriculum, because we're just writing standards. But if we're gonna write curriculum from these standards at the local level, then they need to,
And I think that's what we have to keep in mind, this has to be broad. What you do at the local level is open to interpretation by local districts and
right,
teachers and such, so it's not saying that you won't touch on the contemporary issues, or you can't teach things out of order, or you can't, go by those teachable moments. So I think that's what we have to stay focused on too. This is just broad, that we want every kid in Missouri to know. Yes, there's a lot more than this. We can sit and write books on this, but that's not what we're here to do. So I'm okay with taking 5th grade as the nation, as the regions, as the whatever, combining, hashing out whatever, and splitting it up between 4th and 5th in some shape, form, or fashion. And I look at it from a kid's perspective. I mean, my kid's in 3rd grade now, and as he's grown up, he can see the world through these lenses and get these things. and as he gets older, he's going to be able to comprehend the history and the world issues and things like that a lot better. So.
Okay, go back.
So, I'm gonna kind of go back to, with some of this, I feel like my only concern with taking 5th grade and breaking it up is still that we haven't, I know like with all of what they're saying is teachers have good teaching, but we're not actually asking them to teach kids anything about what they're currently doing. So there's no, if we're talking about this as an assessing document, we never ask them to actually, do you have knowledge of what this system looks like? The teacher says, oh, this is why we do this, and they say it, but it's never actually assessed. And if what you want kids to know is what you actually assess, it's not on the test anywhere in elementary school. Are we asking kids to talk about? Very few about, and what I'm thinking, where it does kind of show up is they talk about checks and balances, but it's in like 2nd, 3rd grade. It's not actually in when they talk about the Constitution. It's kind of, that's one of the things we notice. That's part of the reason why we started spreading this out, with why are some of these pieces here? I don't know. And so it is there, but is it, so they know the system, then they get assessed on, can they describe how the checks and balances work, not with how it actually plays out right now. And so even when Alden was talking, he went from talking about this and saying it's good teaching to saying, well, what's the talking about this thing on the viability of Native Americans. What ends up happening is we get so caught up on what is the explaining what the viability of Native Americans is. We've never actually said, okay, so what? It's great factual knowledge, but how does knowing how that, what does that have to do? If we never actually explain it, we get caught up in the minutia. And so I'm still wondering if we're not just spreading it out so we can spend more time on the minutia between 4th and 5th grade without actually seeing, are we actually getting them what they want? And if this is what we're saying, are we giving them lots of information, but they're not seeing a lot of relevance in it, and they're not seeing a lot of the skills to actually problem solve anything out of it? Are we just saying, okay, so if they know history, like Tanya's saying, but they never actually connect it back to current problems and seeing how it relates to what they're doing? That's part of why we may be doing the film, not because kids aren't exposed to history, but because they never see a relevance and never see why it matters.
So here's,
and that's why I think we've got to be explicit still with saying, now, this, but if we're not going to assess on how they have an understanding, or actually assessing on problems, or assessing on what those pieces are, I still think there's some validity in saying this is what the United States currently looks like. This is what we even see kind of in the foreseeable future. All even do geography, all the way down to, well, we're running out of water in the Colorado River. How are we going to deal with that? I don't know what the issue is, but I mean, I'm just saying I think by looking at it that way, we open up things. My other worry is I see social studies as a dying subject area, not just because people don't want to teach it, but because kids don't care. And I think that part of this is that we're missing some of that love of history and missing some of that because the kids see it as boring and not relevant. And I'm afraid we're taking the same thing and just spreading it out and giving the same thing to the kids that we currently already have.
so here's a question. Are you talking about, look at strand 6. There's a dearth in strand 6. And that's really about the traditions and cultures of the past to the present. So I think part of what we're talking about here is, because when we did strand 7, remember how we were talking about we've got to make inquiry and how we think about it. We have to write it so it's continued all the way down to kindergarten. But I think strand 6 is the same way. How do you compare the traditions of the past and the culture and the history of the past with the present? I think is a piece of strand 6 that we have to intentionally include when we get to strand 6 and say there is a connection between the past and the present. And some of the same issues we're dealing with are the same issues we dealt with 100 years ago and 200 years ago and 400 years ago. So what did they do? What are we doing now? So I think that's a piece of it. So that's why I think what we're talking about is the current and the past. I think it's a strand 6 issue where there's one little bitty sticky note all the way across.
I tend to think of it even as a strand 7 issue.
Right, and I think we've helped with strand 7 to push. We've actually added strand 7 throughout to kindergarten.
know, but actually maybe putting in there, you know, just the phrase connecting to current thinking, current lived experiences. Because that's what I hear you saying, Patrick, is that we're not connecting, whether we're talking about economics or whether we're talking about history or to, well, what's outside your window? What's happening today? Right. And ideally, that's what we're doing in all the areas of social studies. And that kind of makes it a standard. It's not really, I guess it's inquiry in the sense of
But in the way
drawing relationships.
in the way we write these is
And we can do it there too.
Because
We can do it there
if
too.
you, like you said, I mean, I'm just gonna go back to the viability of the Native Americans. How explain if that's the ideal of what we want kids to be able to think about now, how does that lead to this? Like, what is the point of going into very specific information about very specific tribes? Is that what we wanna do? If we're saying we have a finite amount of time, do we wanna spend that much time on that? And I think that's the kind of conversation we do have to look at, because not that that's not good information for people to have, but is that a need to know or is that a nice to know? And I think that's kind of what we want to look at it as how we're framing this, because if I go back to our purpose, I still wonder if they're looking at making an informed decision for the public goods as citizens of a culturally diverse democratic society and an independent world, are we giving them the tools to do that by focusing too much, if we focus too much on the mission and not like explicit? And I do, I mean, like, for me, I'm thinking, yeah, it is, like Craig's point 6, if you look at it, it's got the least, I would say, probably the least sticky notes across it. I do think that's the piece that we're missing, and I almost think if maybe somehow we need to do is find some way to make that an explicit focus at some point in time. You know, it could be, do we do it throughout? I don't know. But I just think you gotta be careful of, even when we talk about just breaking it up, and again, we're not just breaking it up so we can spend more time on facts that for the most part go in one ear and out the other for a lot of students, because if they don't have something to hang it on, and we talked about brain stuff, if they don't have something to hang it on, they hear it, they'll take a test on it, and then it's gone. So where do we make that real world connection for these kids?
And it's interesting, we are in the conversation right now in our district, and I will talk secondary just for a second. We teach 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade are all U.S. history. So it starts at the beginning and ends at current history. So there's 3 years, and the assistant principal who's in charge of social studies came to me and she said, I'd like to reduce U.S. history at the high school level down to 9th grade history. And then we don't have a required world history course, but we'd like to require a world history course. So I asked her the question. I said, what about the way it's taught now is bothering you? And she said, we bored kids to death with history for 3 years in a row. And I told her, I said, so is that a teacher issue or is that a content issue? It's not a content issue because there's nothing boring about history. There's nothing boring about looking at those time periods. I said it's an issues-based problem. The teachers aren't making it relevant to what happened here continues to happen now.
I think it,
all across the world.
I agree. I think the problem is most people, most of us, not all, but most of us don't have an understanding of history ourselves to be able to do that. I mean, you do have to sit through and you have to know the information in order to make it relevant for today. You have to know the information. And I think so much there's no emphasis on the history, so nobody understands the importance of it.
And I think even, Tanya, part of it, so the people who we hired as social studies professionals sat through the same history courses I did, and we learned it as a bunch of discrete facts. We didn't think about issues-based social studies. We didn't think about how to analyze things. I mean, one of the issues that I just read this huge article about what's wrong with the new SAT now that it's gone to Common Core is we're expecting kids to analyze and think mathematically, analyze mathematics. Well, what we really want, kids, and kids don't have that, kids can't analyze mathematics because their teachers don't teach them to do that, because the world doesn't do that, because we've never been taught to really think through mathematics with an analytical mind. But we've done the same thing in social studies. We've never asked teachers to, we just teach a bunch of discrete facts, and we march our way through this chronology of time, and we never ask people to think about, so what's this mean for today? And what did it mean then, and how did it connect back? So how does Plato and what he did in society and what he was calling for in society, how did that affect the founders, and how does that affect today? And we just don't think that way. Or how did injustice here look like injustice here and look like injustice here? We just don't teach that. And I think unless we add it into a strand 6, or we purposefully include it in inquiry, it will be, no matter what we write on these walls, it will be a march through some check boxes. Because we don't, people as a whole do not take the time to think analytically. Some people do. Majority don't.
But you gotta create that motivation. Like you're talking about, because I would think back to my social studies. It was all, I feel like it was almost all history based. Like everything, it's this history, this history, this history. Maybe a U.S. government was told through history. It's everything is history based. Most people don't care. I really honestly believe that most people just don't care. It's not that the facts haven't been presented to them. It's that they hear the facts, they forget the facts because they don't care. If you care, if you create some reason to want to know these things, then they're more likely to actually have to go. And when they're actually applying it, as opposed to just memorizing them for a little bit and then forgetting about it, I think most people don't care because I think most people don't know how the government currently works. They don't, especially as we talk about local levels, even though it matters to them, they just don't care. That's why most people don't vote in them, because they don't really care. They just assume it's going to happen, it'll happen. The people who care, they know. The people who don't care don't, and the majority of people still don't care. And I still think, unfortunately, it's not because we haven't been exposed to history, but because we've never thought about, we aren't asking people on a consistent level to think about how that actually applies to them and what these things do. So we hear, if you don't know the mistakes of the past, you're doomed to repeat them. But most people don't, they say, okay, whatever, great, that sounds great, I don't care. And there isn't that motivation on a large scale, which is still why even in the biggest elections you get, half the people. But in countries where it's right in their face and they know it, they've got 80-90% of the people because they care. I think we created it, we have not really created it, we have this where we haven't created that desire to care about history. So I can say, I think when Craig said history is not boring, I think a lot of people would disagree with him, because if they look at it and read it just as facts, it is, they might find it kind of boring. Why? Because I don't relate to that. I don't relate to, I'm probably, me personally, I'm probably not going to go pick up a book on the viability of Native Americans and read it front to back, because I'm not going to be that interested in it. I don't see how it relates to me or what I currently care about. I might read a book about the history of education because it matters to me. I'll want to read about what Horace Mann thought about things when we're creating this school system that we have, because that's something that speaks to me. But it may not speak to somebody else. I think, how do we show, when we're talking about what's important, how do we actually tell kids this is why it's important and what it's important to them? And I think no matter whether we do it in a strand, I'm concerned sometimes with just doing it with one strand, because I'm afraid that becomes a unit. And then you still teach history, and then you create this as a unit some other time. So one part of the year we'll talk about relationships, but we don't. And so I know I could see it being some point in time and I don't know whether, and I could go back and forth on fourth grade, whatever it is. I think when we look at these things, we've got to still be thinking about how we make it so it is important, because I do think part of social studies is you've got a generation of teachers and other people who didn't care either. And so you're asking people who probably thought history was boring to now at times teach history. And if we're not explicit on what we want that to look like, not necessarily even in the instruction, but what we actually want kids to be able to do, then it's going to come out with the exact same thing.
But regardless of what standard you pick up there, if 5 teachers were to teach it, it'd be taught completely differently.
Right.
It'd be some would love it, some would not. I mean, to me, that's more the local kind of dealing, and I'm trying real hard just to look at this as the state level, what specifically do we want our kids to know? And when do we want them to know it? And how you break that down at the district level looks different than in the classroom, looks different, you know, in the building within your, lots of you guys have different, multiple elementaries in your district. It all looks different. So I try not to worry about that as much as I try to think of where is it developmentally age appropriate, where does the sequence make sense? And if we need to skip this and come back to it, we can, but
Well, it's 3 minutes to 12, so we've taken 45 minutes basically to talk about what the initial question is if we're looking geographically, how does it make sense with the other strands? And history, if we're looking at the nation, then we have to think about national history. So how does that scoot over to fourth grade? We have on the table that we can do it up to a certain point in United States history. So try to do a regional approach to the exploration type. Or we can just try to use grade 4 to tie it into today. Those are the two approaches specifically given. Is there a third approach that we need to consider over lunch? Or are those the two we want to play with?
They're a hybrid. Is there a way that you just kind of maybe don't put as much of fifth grade and fourth grade and start off the beginning of fourth grade with some of a focus on some of the current things?
or just don't draw a line right now and they'll ultimately they'll move to something. As maybe we get to the history stream or something else.
Right, so does grade 4 then look like geographically we're trying to look at regions of the nation?
We're trying to go bigger than the state. So what do you want to call that?
Well, the great cafeteria right now.
Got your medication.
Show you every one.
Excited about that.
We'll let Jeremy stay here and eat this. He needs that experience at least once.
Oh, yeah, she's joking, staying here.
Yeah, that's what
Yes, no. So,
Let's think about it.
let's think about it over lunch.
Sounds great.
I need to call one prepared.
And maybe just think about, maybe we should just stop where we are and go to history. Let's just deal with history.
I don't know that we want to get out. I need to prepare my heart for that.
Or why don't we just leave this question on the side and work through the other streams of geography and see where it takes us?
We're pretty close, I think, on the other ones.
Okay, let's just keep
Hey, if you want to lock up, we're going to be gone for an hour. All right, hey, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
I think we are. I think we're pretty close on the other ones.
No, it's, we're still on tape, aren't we?
Yeah, I'll turn it off. Then you can say what you really think.
Of course.
Just teasing, Kate.